I think he was right. He sought to establish and maintain a certain order and discipline in the rear guard. If the rear guard was left to the whims of the different groups, things could get out of hand and could affect the situation in the fighting fronts, as happened in the Republican zone.
The Phalange was in trouble. Jose Antonio had been killed in a Republican jail. All other potential candidates were in prison or dead, and the organization was riven with ideological and personal schism. On April 17, 1937, a former mechanic, Manuel Edia, was confirmed as leader. He had no formal education, was unimaginative, and ineffective. He was easy meat for Franco. 2 days after his election, Franco, as head of state, declared the Phalange and the Carlists would be unified in one national movement under his own direction. When Edia challenged Franco's authority, he was sentenced to death, although this sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. By bringing the red-berried Carlist and the blue-shirted Phalange movement under his direct leadership, Franco assured the triumph of his personal brand of authoritarian conservatism.
Lights. I'm just going to speak very briefly about the battles of Madrid and the Battle of the Jarama, and then I'm going to introduce Clarence. I had, on this film, the Grenada film, there is about a 5 to 10 minute segment of the Battle of Madrid. It's not covered in much detail, but it was kind of the most dramatic moment in the first 6 months of the Spanish Civil War. I refer you to the map handout. Who doesn't have the map handout? Get one myself. Hold on. They're on the table back here. I've actually, today I prepared these out of Hugh Thomas's The Spanish Civil War, which is, as Professor Bailly mentioned, it's the most comprehensive and balanced account, objective account that is, from a conventional historical point of view. And the maps that are on the handout include, on one side, the division of Spain, August to September 1936, the advance of the Army of Africa. This mostly shows southern Spain. As recounted in the film, the nationalists landed their troops in Seville, and they swept north, northwest. They also conquered most of the northwest part of Spain, Galicia, Asturias, and a good part of the area around Bilbao. It actually took them a better part of another year, well into 37, before they were able to conquer the entire north. There's a map here of Barcelona, downtown Barcelona. Shows you some of the main points in the brief fighting that occurred in Barcelona. Then on the opposite side, if you jump from the map on one side of the advance of the Army of Africa, on north toward Madrid, you can see they swung sort of in an arc, north, northwest, and then eastward, to try and take Madrid from the west. So on the opposite side, you'll see the advance on Madrid. That's in the upper left-hand corner. The various villages and towns that constituted the outer suburbs, or the satellite towns around Madrid, and so they approached Madrid from the west. At the same time, they were trying to make the Republican forces think that they were going to attack Madrid directly from the south. At the same time, the nationalists were also sweeping up along what's called the Costa del Sol of Spain today. They took Malaga, they took Grenada, they took Cordoba, they took Toledo after they held off the Republicans in the siege of the Alcazar. And so they're advancing on Madrid basically at the beginning of November. The government in Madrid basically panicked, and the official government fled the city with whatever files they could take with them. The other files were destroyed, and the effective governance of Madrid was left in the hands of the communists and the socialists, just as the anarchists were dominant left force in Barcelona. The communists were really the backbone of the left in Madrid, and one has to recognize that it was really due to the Communist Party and that the city was saved from capture by the nationalists at that point. As you know, Madrid eventually was captured by the nationalists at the end of the war. But the map here shows the map on with the front, November 7th to November 23rd, basically shows a battle that raged for 2 weeks. Now, the Army of Africa was a highly professional organization. It included, its officer corps were Spanish officers, basically of the landowning class, who had served in most of Spain's colonial wars. They had fought 2 colonial wars in Morocco to put down the indigenous Rif rebellion. They were highly professionalized and totally reactionary, as you can as noted. And they had command of mercenaries. They had command of Moroccan native troops who were fierce fighters. I mean, these were troops who, from the age 7 or 8, learned how to kill. I mean, they were basically, professional killers. It was their way of life, and so this highly efficient force swept up through southern Spain. They made short work of the various village militias. There was a huge repression, mass executions as depicted, and this army of about 20,000 approached the western edge of Madrid on November 7th, 1936. And there was very much a sense of gloom in the city, but the communist militants, articulated best by La Pasionaria, were saying no pasaran, and they were preparing the working class of Madrid to fight house to house, because they knew that if Franco got in and took the city, that they were all going to die anyway, right? And so there was this huge mass mobilization. Women played a major part in mobilizing their communities, and basically the work, everything except the vital services was stopped, and tens of thousands of working class men went to the front, went to the trenches in the western edge of the city. Most of them weren't even armed. The ones in front were armed, and the ones in back were waiting for the ones in front to die so that they could use their weapons. And so they met, and at that point, the first of the international brigades finally began to arrive in Madrid, and they marched through Madrid, and it did a great deal to bolster the morale. The Madrileños began to feel that they weren't alone, that somebody in the world was solidarizing with them. And all of that is captured in a few minutes on the film, very dramatic, and I had really hoped to show it, but the VHR is not being very cooperative, the VCR. However, another thing happened too was that the Soviet Union did send first contingents of Air Force to the Madrid area, and the nationalist Air Force had almost complete air supremacy up to that moment. But when the nationalist planes came once again to bomb Madrid, and they were dropping incendiaries and trying to burn whole sections of the city, the nationalist, or the Republican Air Force was able to shoot a lot of them down, and that raised the morale too. Now, in western Madrid, in the map where it says University City at the top, there is on the west the Casa del Campo, which is a huge park, and it has high elevations, and on the western part of it, and then it dips down into a valley. I've been to Madrid once. I've only seen this once, so I'm not claiming to speak from much personal recollection. But the Manzanar River runs along the eastern edge of the Casa del Campo, and then just to the east of that, from what I understand, the ground rises steeply again, hills or bluffs or something, elevations, or at least at that time. And the Republican forces were on the eastern side of the valley, waiting for the nationalists. Actually, the workers' militias and some elements of the international brigades crossed into the Casa del Campo and fought for every inch of ground there. And it was basically untrained workers' militias, people who had no military training whatsoever for the most part, were just handed a rifle and a cartridge belt and told to go. And so you can imagine they're up against a professional elite force. But they pretty much managed to stand their ground. And later, the nationalists attempted to advance in the south, where you see Toledo Bridge. They attempted to get across there. They penetrated briefly the area around where it says the Model prison, the Montaña. They penetrated briefly, actually, into one of the center avenues of Madrid before they were driven back. But the main show actually came when they managed, partly because of the default of the anarchists, and I don't want to cast too much blame here. Durruti had brought a contingent, Durruti, the anarchist leader, had brought a contingent of anarchists from Barcelona, and they were given a sector in front of University City, and they stood off several nationalist attacks, but then at some point they broke. Maybe they weren't supplied or something, but they broke. And the nationalists came across the Manzanar and climbed up the bluff, and they got into University City. It'd be like if they got on the Baskin Hill, you know. And they took the philosophy department. I mean, these buildings were half in ruins already from bombardment. And there were elements of the international brigades, the Talman Brigade, which was named for the German communist leader, the Andre Marty Battalion. There were fighters from all nationalities there, along with Madrid militia. And in the film, they interviewed somebody who was on the Republican side who survived it. He said that in the philosophy building, for example, the Moors were on one floor, and the Republican fighters were on the floor above them, and they would chop holes in the floor and drop grenades on them. And by another account, there were Moroccans above and the militia below, and they put grenades in the elevator lifts to send them up to explode in the faces of the Moroccans. I mean, it was literally, you could hear them reloading in the next room. There was hand-to-hand fighting, and eventually the Republicans managed to fight the nationalists to a stalemate, and so the front actually stabilized there, right on the western edge of Madrid. After that, there were several attempts by the nationalists to take Madrid by less of frontal assaults, and you can see the map that says the Battle of the Coruña Road. There were a couple of major battles to the west and northwest of Madrid, particularly around a small town called Bodilla, or Pueblo as they called it, and several of the brigades of the battalions of the international brigades were actually, some of them fought to the last man in order to stop the nationalists. The nationalists managed to pushed the front right up to the edge of the city again, but then they were thrown back, and it was at a cost, I think it was a 15,000 dead. That was in December and January 1936 and 1937. Finally, the Battle of the Jarama, and I'm just going to quote very briefly about the Jarama, and then I'm going to let you ask questions from Clarence, because Clarence Kalin here was in the Abraham Lincoln Battalion, Brigade, and was at the battle. He was at the Jarama for 4 months. Okay, so let me just find that here. That'll be the last you'll hear of me for a while. Okay. Basically, the objective of the Nationalists was to cut the link between Madrid and Valencia. Valencia is on the coast, on the Mediterranean coast.
What was coming in from Valencia?
Supplies. I mean, Valencia really was, along in Barcelona, Valencia really was the main port. It was the main entrepot for supplying Madrid. You know, like all the food and munitions from the Soviet Union, for example. So the Nationalists essentially wanted to come up at Madrid from the south and through the valley of the Jarama, and to cut Madrid's lifeline to Valencia. So I'll just quote very briefly. The attack, a surprise to General Posses, the Republican commander of the Army of the Center, began on February 6th. The Nationalists drove furiously into Cienpozuelos, defended by the newly formed Republican 18th Brigade, whose advance elements were totally overwhelmed. Arada, as another Nationalist commander, advanced in the north to capture a 697-meter peak, La Maranosa, where 2 Republican battalions fought to the last man. On February 7th, Barón, that's another Nationalist commander, reaches the junction of the rivers Jarama and Manzanares, bringing the Madrid to Valencia high road under fire. The Republican defense was hampered by a number of confused new brigades who had been intended to take part in a projected offensive and now found themselves in retreat. On February 9th, the Republican defense was reorganized all along the heights on the east bank of the Jarama. But a group of Moroccans silently worked their way around in the dark to the Pindoque Bridge, where they knifed the sentries of the French Andre Marty Battalion. There was the 14th and 15th International Brigades fought at the Jarama, and I believe Clarence was in the 15th. The Nationalists cavalry then swept across the river. There was an attempt to blow the bridge, but the bridge went up a few feet and came back down, so the bridge was usable. By 3 in the afternoon, a Nationalist brigade was across despite heavy Republican air attacks. Here they met the bulk of the Andre Marty Battalion, whom they surrounded but who resisted until their ammunition was exhausted. Then the Moroccan cavalry charged and killed most of the survivors. The Slav Dubrovsky Battalion, however, now held the line in the area of the Pindoque Bridge. The Garibaldi Battalion from high ground concentrated their fire on the bridgehead and held up any further advance. The ensuing battle was marked by Republican control of the air for the first time. Nationalist bombers were driven out of the sky by Russian fighters. It also marked the first fight of the 15th International Brigade, commanded by Colonel Gall, a naturalized Russian of Hungarian birth. It included a number of